Hi there. Today I'm here to talk to you about making change sexy. One of the challenges in supply chain is our roles as supply chain practitioners is really about bringing many changes into organizations. We introduce new systems like sales and operations planning. We bring in big procurement projects which introduce cost savings to the business. We ask people to do stuff differently every single day. And our role as supply chain practitioners is to make that transition easy for our customers, the end user. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to take you through a little bit of an example of a change that happened at one of my clients. And then we're going to talk through some of the theory around change management in order to help you to make change sexy. So moving into some stories, the first thing I want to do is talk to you about a case study. So in our client, what happened was they had multiple telephone systems. The telephone systems were lined up in many different places. Everybody had a different type of unit. Everybody was billing to a different place. So there was multiple bills coming through. Some were using voice over internet. Some were using fiber. Some were using cell phones. Some were using a landline. And the business took a conscious decision to standardize across the whole business and introduce a new telephone. The benefits of this were that it was going to be a huge cost saving for the business. And so one morning early, everyone started to arrive for work, and their normal telephone had been replaced with something that looked a bit like a spaceship. There was an uproar. People didn't know what to do. Nobody was sure how to operate the device. It had no buttons. It wasn't clear which button was for what, or the functionalities, or any of that stuff. And suddenly, everybody had to learn this new technology. No change management had taken place for the end user. So, what went wrong? The need for change was not understood or defined. So the procurement team, although they were focusing on cost, hadn't looked at how it was going to benefit the greater business and communicated it with them, shared it with them so that they would know that the change was coming. In addition, when the project team looked at the stakeholder analysis, they considered the people on the project team. So the project team was part of the stakeholder analysis, and they looked at it from the perspective of the project and procurement team. What they didn't consider was the end user. They didn't look at the end user and what their needs were and what kind of information they would need to make the change successful. They also ran a pilot test, which is good practice in change management, but the pilot test was run with technical savvy individuals, people who were not the normal day-to-day users of telephones. It wasn't the admin ladies. It wasn't the lady in technical buying or the person down in the workshop who doesn't know how to use new technology. And therefore, a lot of the questions that were answered through the pilot test were missing things and input that the end user would have given the team to make it easier to transition. Training. There was no training. Literally, the spaceship arrived and there was a one-pager next to it on how to operate it. But it didn't tell them about how to do forwarding of calls. It didn't tell them how to set their voice messages. It didn't tell them how to retrieve their voice messages. It didn't tell them how to put a caller on hold while they answered another call. And therefore, there was mass confusion. And lastly was communication. In this change process, all communication was done via email. In an organization where many people had overflowing inboxes, 200-300 mails a day, the last one they were going to read is something from procurement about something to do with telephones. And therefore, they missed their audience. They missed the people that needed to know about the change. So what happened is we had a whole factory of people staring at a strange spaceship on their desk, and they each had very different responses. The first was shock. Especially the technophobes, the people who are fearful of change and new things, were shocked. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to operate this thing. They weren't sure how to do their jobs. And in many instances, their job revolved around the phone. There was also denial. So many people chose to bury their heads and not apply the approach of the new phone. They use their mobiles. They use other means and methods to make their phone calls, with the result that they increase their cell phone bills contrary to the saving that was meant to be achieved. Within the customer service center, there was huge frustration. There were many missed calls because people didn't know how to transfer calls. They didn't know how to put people on hold. They also couldn't retrieve their voice messages, so they were missing critical information from customers, and it impacted on customer service. And the net result was anger. There was a sense of resentment and anger that was voiced by the teams. People were not happy. They were frustrated, and they were really, really angry because they were not able to do their jobs. And only a few, some of the youngsters who like to experiment with technology, adopted the change. So it's really important when you do a change, no matter how small and insignificant it might be to you, to consider the bigger picture, the other people in that picture. Because the reality is, you might adopt that change quickly, but others won't. And that's where our change management process needs to focus. The Kubler-Ross change curve is a very old curve, but it's something that still stands today. And it is the typical response of people to changes. So they go through the 8 or 7 stages of change for every single change. So if you think about it, every time you change something, you go through this. If you get a new cell phone, you go through this. You buy a new oven, you go through this. You get a new ERP system, you go through this. So the first thing is everybody goes into shock. Shock or surprise at the change. Shock that this is happening to me. Once we go through shock, the next thing is denial. It's a sense of disbelief, and we put our heads under the sand and we try and pretend that the change will go away. And if you think about many factory changes or supply chain changes, this is quite common, because if people put their heads down and bury them, over time the change disappears and they don't have to deal with it. They don't have to deal with the circumstances around the change. Then we go into frustration, because suddenly now I need to be able to do my job, but I can't do my job because the system has changed. And that makes me really, really frustrated, especially when it's in case of I've got my own system and process that works, and now you want me to use that one over there, but it doesn't talk to mine over here. So this is a huge issue in terms of change management. And then there's also depression. So some people will go through a phase of depression. They will lack energy. They'll be demotivated. They'll be low morale because they are just not getting it. And then we start experimentation. So as we feel we have to use the new system, we might step forward and test, and so forth. And as we do that, we start to engage with the change, and at some point it clicks in and it becomes part of who we are. But the challenge is if I look at this curve of change, what you will see is everybody goes through it differently. Some will go through it really slowly. Others will go through it so fast you didn't even realize they went through it. And each person is different. So what we need to do is we need to be conscious that people are going to go through this process when they recognize our change. If you think about the current COVID-19 situation, I suspect many of you are in different places on this curve right now. So some of you have been in denial, where you go, well, it's not going to affect me. It's in China. It's somewhere else. It's not an African thing, and I don't need to worry about it. Then suddenly it hits your country and you're like, sure, I'm frustrated. I can't go out. Schools are closed. I can't do my job. I have to wear a mask. I have to sanitize. And there's this huge amount of frustration that hits you. Then depression comes because everything's changed. The world has changed around us. We have to deal with all the stuff going on inside as a result of this big thing that's hanging over our heads. And at some point, we start to experiment, a little bit like this conference, where rather than having a face-to-face conference where you all fly in, we experiment with the change and we try something new. We are trying online conferencing. It's new for all of us. It's new for us presenters. It's new for you guys who have to listen. And so at some point we start to move with the change and do things differently. So it's really important that you understand the change curve as you are dealing with each step in a change. And what you also need to understand is that people are different, which is why it's important to understand a little bit about how people work. So one of the challenges that we have is that when we introduce change, we can only see what is going on right now for each person. So if I look over here, you can see their actions and behavior. You don't know what they think of your change. You don't know what they're feeling. You don't know what they believe about your change. All you know is how they are acting and behaving. So what are their actions telling you? If you think back to my case study, where the shift manager was using his cell phone instead of the phone on his desk, his action is telling me he doesn't like this change. But I'm not sure if it's because he's scared of the change, if it's because he's angry about the change, or if it's just because he doesn't know how to use the new phone. I don't know. So the big thing we need to be doing as we do these changes is we need to find out what's going on over here. And there's only one way to do that, and that is to ask. So if you think about it, you have to ask a lot of questions while you are doing change. So if you notice one individual is really adopting the change fast, is excited about the change, ask him what he's thinking. Talk to him. Find out what he's doing that's different to everyone else. What's making him keen to do the change? Because this information is useful information as you move into understanding what works. By the same token, if you happen to notice that Peter in the engineering department hasn't yet logged into the new system, you need to find out what's stopping him. You need to go have a conversation with him. You need to ask him what is going on. Because if you don't ask him, you'll never know what he is thinking. You'll never know what he's feeling, and you'll just make assumptions. And the biggest assumption everyone makes is that it's about attitude, but it's not. The reasons people don't change are often such silly things that we don't even know. So for example, a classic one is one of my clients was going to fire someone for not using the MRP system. He was running everything on an Excel spreadsheet and not logging in. So he went, and I suggested to him to ask. He asked and asked and asked. And what he discovered is that the reason no one was using the system is he didn't have a login. He had never been given a login. So he was doing the best he could in the situation he was. And as soon as he had his login, he used the system. Another example of this, I sat with a client and the person was talking to me about their on time in full, highly frustrated with everyone's bad attitude. Nobody approves anything in time, and she was quite angry about it. And again, asking questions changed that. She sat down with her team, she asked them what was going on. And the more questions she asked, the more she realized that over a period of time of handover, nobody had trained the new people properly in how to do the task. So they were doing what they believed was right, but they were missing critical parts to activate the process. And that was a huge eye-opener for her. So one of the things we really need to be doing as we go into change is asking questions. Don't forget to ask. Okay. So, clear this annotation. Okay. So, in summary, some of the lessons we've spoken through today include ignite the need for change. People need to understand why. What is the reason for the change? How is it going to benefit me? They're not interested in profit and cost and all of that good stuff unless they're a director or a shareholder. What they're interested in is how does this change impact me and make my life easier? Secondly, you need to know the real stakeholder. When you are impacting a change, you need to know the people who are impacted most by the change. Who are the people who are going to use the product? Who are the end users? Thirdly, make sure you do your pilot test with the end user. Don't do it with someone who already has the right education and the right attitude and abilities to be able to use it quickly. Take the person who's the most difficult person, because if they can use it, anyone can. Don't be afraid to choose your problem children for the pilot test, because if you get them on board, you've got everyone on board. Target your communication strategy. Use a multi-pronged approach to communication. Make sure you're talking to people in meetings. Make sure you're sending the emails. Make sure you are talking to them through newsletters, through notice boards. Try and make sure you're bringing it through at every angle so that they are well aware of the change that's coming their way. And lastly, make sure you are developing their capabilities and their skills so that they can use the system or process that you're implementing. One of my worst things was where a client literally trained everyone 12 months before the go live date. By the time the training happened and then their go live date, they'd forgotten everything. So in summary, these are the things that I would like you to remember as you leave here today. And to make it fun, I thought I would use the acronym SAPICS. So, know your stakeholder, educate your user, make it exciting, and know your why. If you do these things, you will be on your way to making change sexy. Thank you. Thank you very much. I look forward to taking some questions in a little bit and hearing from all of you.